November 14th, 1945, 6:47 a.m., Camp Monterey, California. The smell hit Mieko Tanaka first. Not the usual stench that had defined 3 months of captivity, the sour rice water, the mildew crawling up barrack walls, the unwashed fear of 44 women packed into wooden bunks. This was different, rich, fatty. It cut through the dawn cold like something alive, sizzling meat, crackling in its own fat. Her hand froze against the rough barrack door, calloused fingers pressed into wood grain worn smooth by ocean wind. Behind her, women stirred from restless sleep. Yuki's voice came soft at her shoulder, 19 years old with a face that had aged a decade in 3 months. "Sister, what is that smell?" Mieko didn't answer. She knew that smell. Once 3 years ago, in a field hospital outside Shanghai, they'd treated an injured American pilot before he died. His rations had included something the Chinese nurses whispered about with equal parts revulsion and strange fascination. Bacon, American bacon. The guard tower bell shattered the moment, sharp, urgent, different from the usual morning call that dragged them from sleep at dawn. Then the voice, harsh and amplified through a megaphone that made words bounce off wooden buildings. "All prisoners, line up outside your quarters. Bring nothing." The translator repeated it in Japanese, his voice tight with an emotion Mieko couldn't identify. Every muscle in her body locked. Every breath became labor, because every woman in that barrack understood exactly what bring nothing meant. They'd heard the stories, whispered in darkness between bunks, passed from camp to camp like a disease no medicine could cure. When they tell you to bring nothing, you're not coming back. Mieko's hands began to tremble. She reached for Yuki, pulled the girl close, her little sister, the baby she'd promised their mother to protect when the bombs started falling on Osaka. The girl who still folded origami cranes from scraps of bandage gauze, believing in miracles, even after everything they'd endured. Around them, panic rippled through the barrack like a stone through glass. Ayame Nakamura, 23 and 7 months pregnant, clutched her swollen belly with both hands, tears already streaming. Her husband Kenji had gone missing during the chaos of Okinawa. She carried the only piece of him that remained. Fumiko Ishida stood near her cot with the strange dignity of someone who'd already accepted death. 58 years old, gray-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. She'd been a school teacher, once English literature. She'd taught Shakespeare to Japanese girls in Yokohama, believing understanding the West would help her country find its place in the modern world. Then the war came, and English became the language of the enemy. But there was another voice, sharp and defiant. Chiyo, 21, factory worker, all edges and anger. "We should resist," she hissed. "If they're going to kill us anyway, at least die with honor." Mieko turned to her. "Resist so they have an excuse. We protect each other by surviving." Surviving as what? Their playthings, as witnesses, as proof that we are human. The words felt hollow, even as she spoke them, but Yuki's hand tightened in hers, and that was answer enough. They shuffled outside into the November morning. Coastal air bit through thin prison uniforms, faded gray cotton that had once been white, now stained with months of sweat and dirt and despair. Cardboard stuffed inside their shoes to cover the holes. They formed ragged lines in the gravel courtyard, and they waited. The smell of bacon grew stronger, drifting from the mess hall, carried on wind that came off the Pacific Ocean just beyond the barbed wire. Mieko stood at attention, her mind racing through memories she tried so hard to bury. 27 years old, field nurse with the 23rd Infantry Hospital Unit. She'd seen things no person should see, not just Japanese soldiers, though there had been so many of those. Boys bleeding out on bamboo stretchers, calling for their mothers in dialects she barely understood, but also the civilians, the Okinawan families caught in crossfire, the grandmother burned beyond recognition but still clutching her grandson's hand, the teenage girl who'd swallowed poison rather than face capture. Mieko had held them all, bandaged what could be bandaged, whispered comfort to those beyond saving. When the field hospital was overrun during evacuation, she'd been captured still wearing her blood-stained uniform, medical bag still slung across her shoulder. Her brother Hiroshi had been a fighter pilot, 22 years old, eyes bright with propaganda certainty about Japan's divine destiny. He'd written his last letter 3 months before Midway Sister, "When I die, know that I died making our family proud. The Americans are monsters who bomb civilians and show no mercy, but we will defeat them with our spirit, with our willingness to sacrifice everything." His plane had gone down somewhere in the vast Pacific. His body never recovered. No funeral, just a wooden memorial tablet on the family altar that their mother would never see again because the firebombing of Tokyo had turned their entire neighborhood to ash. Beside her, Yuki shivered, not just from cold. Her little sister had worked at the Mitsubishi plant in Osaka, riveting metal panels for the very fighters their brother had flown. Captured during the chaotic harbor evacuation when American planes destroyed the docks, Yuki kept an origami crane in her pocket. Even now, 17 of them made so far. Most had been confiscated and thrown away, but she kept folding whenever she found paper. "When you fold 1,000 cranes, your wish comes true," she'd whispered once in the darkness. The sound of boots on gravel made every woman in formation stiffen. Sergeant William Miller appeared first, 35 years old with burn scars mapping the length of his left forearm, Pearl Harbor survivor. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles stood out like cables beneath weathered skin. Behind him came younger guards. Most looked uncomfortable. Some wouldn't meet the prisoner's eyes, but they all carried rifles. Then Corporal Connor O'Brien stepped into view, 25, tall and blond with tired blue eyes that seemed older than his face. A medical corpsman's armband, faded from too many washings, circled his right arm. He carried no rifle, just a medical bag slung over his shoulder. He positioned himself slightly apart from the other guards, his expression carefully neutral. Mieko found herself watching him without meaning to. There was something different about this one, something in the way he held himself, less certain, less secure in the rightness of what was happening. The camp commander appeared last. Major Richardson, 48 career officer, graying temples, no combat experience. He climbed onto the raised platform constructed for morning formations. Behind him, the American flag snapped in coastal wind. He held a piece of paper and read from it in a flat, bureaucratic voice. "As of November 12, 1945, all prisoners of war in American custody are subject to International Red Cross health and sanitation protocols. You will undergo mandatory medical inspection and decontamination procedures. This is not punishment. This is standard procedure required by international law. You will comply with all instructions given by medical personnel." The translator repeated the words in Japanese, his voice still tight with that strange emotion. Mieko heard the words, but couldn't make them connect into meaning. Medical inspection, decontamination procedures, not punishment, standard procedure. The phrases felt like traps, like lies, wrapped in the language of bureaucracy and international treaties. Then Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his voice cut through the morning air like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Translator, tell them to remove their outer clothing." Silence fell across the compound. Not the simple absence of sound, the presence of horror so complete it consumed everything else. The wind stopped, birds stopped singing, even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. The translator's face went white, his hands trembled as he clutched his clipboard. "Sir, I don't think that's an order, Private." The young man's voice shook as he turned to face the women and spoke in Japanese. "You are ordered to remove your outer clothing." Someone gasped. The sound ripped through the formation like stone through glass. Nurse Kaori simply fainted. She crumpled to the gravel, and women on either side caught her before she hit the ground. Yuki's grip on Mieko's arm turned painful. Her fingers dug in hard enough to leave bruises. "Sister, what do we do?" Mieko had no answer. Her throat had closed. Her heart hammered so hard against her ribs she thought it might break through. Around them, fear became a living thing with weight and substance. Ayame clutched her pregnant belly, tears streaming faster than she could wipe them away. Fumiko closed her eyes and began to whisper what sounded like a Buddhist prayer for the dying. Young Nurse Kaori was crying so hard she couldn't breathe, great gasping sobs that shook her thin frame. In that moment, every story they'd ever heard came flooding back. Every nightmare about revenge and humiliation and the things soldiers did to women when all restraint was stripped away. Every piece of propaganda they'd been fed during the war suddenly seemed true. Chiyo's voice cut through the fear, barely above a whisper, but sharp as broken glass. "I told you, we should have resisted." But Mieko's hands were already moving without her conscious control. She reached for the buttons of her prison uniform. Her fingers felt numb, clumsy, like they belonged to someone else. Around her, other women began to comply. Trembling hands struggled with buttons and ties. Some tried to maintain modesty with torn undergarments that provided no real coverage, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched forward, trying to make themselves smaller, less visible, less real. Fumiko stood straight, even as she unbuttoned her uniform, trying to model dignity in the face of what was coming. Mieko helped Yuki with her buttons because her sister's hands wouldn't work properly. They shook too violently to grip anything. "I'm scared," Yuki whispered. "Sister, I'm so scared." I know. The smell of bacon still drifted across the compound, stronger now, almost mocking in its abundance. The scent of American plenty while they stood half naked in the cold morning air, waiting for whatever came next. Then something unexpected happened. Corporal O'Brien stepped forward. He spoke softly to Sergeant Miller, then to the translator. The two older men had a brief, tense exchange. Miller's face flushed red with anger, but finally, reluctantly, he nodded once. The translator looked confused as he repeated the words he'd been given. "You are not being punished. You are being checked for infections and parasites. This is required medical procedure for your health and safety." For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The words hung in the air like smoke that refused to dissipate. Not punishment, medical procedure. Then Corporal O'Brien gestured toward the corner of the courtyard that had been hidden behind the command building. 6 wooden tubs appeared carried by guards who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Steam rose from the water inside them. Real steam. Hot water. The first they'd seen in months. Buckets of soap followed. White bars that looked clean and new. Stacks of towels. Actual cotton towels, not the rags they'd been using. And then came the Red Cross nurses. 3 women in crisp white uniforms with red crosses on their armbands emerged from the medical building. They carried bags of supplies. They wore masks and gloves. They moved with calm professionalism, neither hurried nor hesitant. The lead nurse was maybe 32 with auburn hair, pulled back in a practical bun. Her name tag read Bennett. She spoke to the translator in clear, measured tones. "Tell them we're here to examine them for medical conditions, malnutrition, infections, skin diseases, parasites, any injuries that need treatment. The warm water and soap are for decontamination and comfort. No one will be harmed. We're following Geneva Convention protocols for prisoner health and welfare." The translator repeated it in Japanese, and this time his voice held something that might have been relief. But the women still stood frozen, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the cruelty to begin, because this couldn't be real. This had to be a trick. Sergeant Miller stood off to the side, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. But he made no move to interfere. He simply watched with those cold, assessing eyes. The guards who'd carried the tubs turned away deliberately, giving privacy, facing outward toward the perimeter fence with their backs to the women. The Red Cross nurses approached gently, not threatening, not grabbing, just waiting with infinite patience for the women to understand what was being offered. Mieko looked at the steaming water, at the soap, at the clean towels stacked carefully on a wooden table. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing, couldn't reconcile it with everything she'd expected. Where was the cruelty? Where was the revenge? Fumiko spoke quietly in Japanese, her voice steady despite everything. Perhaps they mean what they say. Nurse Bennett stepped closer. She spoke through the translator, her tone gentle, not patronizing, but genuinely kind. I know you're frightened. I know you don't trust us, but I promise you we're only here to help. You've been through enough. Let us take care of you now. It was the way she said it, not with pity, not with contempt, but with something that sounded almost like respect. One by one, behind canvas screens that provided privacy, the medical examinations began. When it was Miyeko's turn, Nurse Bennett examined her with careful hands. She documented the scars from Miyeko's nursing work in the field hospitals. She found the infected wound on Miyeko's shoulder that had been festering for 2 weeks. She cleaned it with steady precision and applied antibiotics from a tube that looked impossibly expensive. Then she handed Miyeko a warm towel. You'll be okay, she said through the translator, not as a question, as a statement of fact. Her tone wasn't pity, it was respect. One professional to another, one nurse to another, across battle lines that had divided their countries. Miyeko stepped into the warm bath, the first hot water she'd touched in 4 months. The soap actually lathered. It smelled clean, medicinal but clean. For the first time since her capture, Miyeko let herself cry. Not from fear, not from despair, from the shocking, disorienting realization that she was being treated as a human being again. Around her, other women experienced the same revelation. Yuki sobbed openly as a nurse gently washed her hair and checked for lice. Ayame was examined by a nurse who spoke softly to her pregnant belly, checking the baby's position with practiced hands. Fumiko accepted a clean towel with a dignified nod, her eyes wet with unshed tears. Even Kaori, who'd fainted from fear, was being tended to with genuine medical concern. After the baths, clean uniforms were distributed. Plain gray cotton, but soft and warm and whole. Real cotton underwear. Donated shoes that actually fit their feet. Their hair was deloused and cut neatly. Their wounds were treated with real medicine, and through it all, the guards kept their backs turned, giving privacy, offering dignity. When it was over, the women were led to the mess hall, and that was when Miyeko smelled it again. Bacon, but closer now, much closer. The mess hall doors opened, and the scent rolled out like a wave of heat. Metal trays appeared clanging against wooden tables. U.S. Army issue, scratched from years of use but clean, actually clean. Each woman received the same portion on her tray. 2 strips of bacon, thick cut crispy at the edges, fat still glistening in the overhead lights. Scrambled eggs, real eggs, yellow and fluffy, still steaming. Toast white bread, actually toasted brown with butter melting into the porous surface. Coffee, bitter and strong and dark as crude oil in tin cups. Orange slices, fresh, not canned juice, running across the tray and mixing with everything else. Miyeko stared at the food like it might explode. She'd seen military rations before. She knew this was standard American breakfast. But knowing it and seeing it on a tray in front of her were 2 completely different things. Beside her, Yuki's hands hovered over the food without touching it. Sister, is this real? Around them, every woman faced the same crisis of belief. What kind of trick was this? Fumiko spoke quietly, her English teacher's knowledge surfacing. This is American military rations. Standard issue. I recognize it from before the war when missionaries came to Yokohama. Why would they feed us this? Someone whispered. No one had an answer that made sense. The bacon cooled on the trays. The eggs stopped steaming. The toast absorbed the melted butter until it glistened. And still, no one ate. Then Corporal O'Brien entered the mess hall. He carried his own tray, the same food. He sat at the guard's table 15 feet away from the prisoners' section, and he began to eat. Miyeko watched him cut his bacon with the edge of his fork, metal scraping against metal, watched him raise it to his mouth. Chew deliberately, swallow. He didn't die, didn't react with pain or sickness, just ate like food was supposed to be eaten, like this was normal. Slowly, carefully, Miyeko picked up her fork. The metal was cold and heavy, real silverware, not wooden chopsticks or split bamboo. She speared a small piece of bacon, raised it to her face. The smell was overwhelming up close, fatty and salty and smoky in a way she'd never experienced. Hiroshi, forgive me. She put it in her mouth. The fat melted on her tongue instantly. Salt exploded across her taste buds like a small detonation. The meat itself was crispy on the outside, but chewy inside, a texture she'd never encountered. Pork, yes, but transformed by heat and fat and American abundance into something entirely new. It was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted, and that realization made her cry again, not from joy, from the stunning, disorienting horror of discovering that the enemy made beautiful food. The propaganda crumbled in the face of crispy bacon and real butter. How could she sustain hatred toward people who created something this generous? Around her, other women began to eat. Some cried openly, some ate mechanically, their faces blank. Some savored every bite like it might be their last meal on earth. Ayame took a small bite of egg and immediately began sobbing. Her baby kicked stronger than it had in days, as if even the unborn child recognized nourishment after weeks of deprivation. Fumiko ate with perfect composure, but tears ran down her weathered cheeks unchecked. Yuki whispered between bites, "Why does their food taste like home should have tasted?" Mieko had no answer. From across the room, Corporal O'Brien watched them. His tired blue eyes held an expression she couldn't quite read. Not satisfaction, not triumph, something else, something that looked almost like sadness. November 18th, 1945. The convoy of military trucks rumbled north along Highway 1, carrying the prisoners toward their new confinement. Mieko pressed her face against the canvas side of the truck bed, watching California landscape roll past through the gap. She caught glimpses of the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly to the west, the same ocean that separated her from everything she'd known, the same ocean that had swallowed her brother's plane and 10,000 other young men who'd believed the propaganda about divine destiny. The smell of salt air mixed with diesel exhaust. Pine trees replaced the scrub brush of the inland camp. The road curved along coastal bluffs where seagulls wheeled and cried in the cold November sky. Yuki sat beside her, eyes wide with something that might have been wonder if wonder were still possible in their circumstances. "Look, sister, the birds." It was the first time in months that Yuki had pointed out something beautiful without immediately remembering why beauty was dangerous, why hope was a trap. Mieko squeezed her sister's hand but said nothing. After 2 hours, the trucks turned through a gate marked Camp Coastal Monterey. The sign was new, recently painted, almost welcoming, in a way that made Mieko's stomach tighten with suspicion. The camp sat on a bluff overlooking Monterey Bay. Barbed wire still enclosed the perimeter. Guard towers still punctuated the corners with their silent watchers. But the buildings looked different. Wooden barracks that seemed maintained rather than merely functional. Windows that actually opened. Garden plots between the structures where vegetables grew in neat rows. When the truck stopped and the women climbed down, Mieko noticed details that felt wrong. Not threatening wrong, just unexpected wrong. The gravel pathways were raked. The barracks had proper steps instead of stacked crates. Someone had planted flowers near the command building. Actual flowers. Bright yellow chrysanthemums that served no functional purpose except to be beautiful. What kind of prison camp planted flowers? Chiyo appeared at her shoulder, voice low and sharp. "Don't trust it. This is how they break you with kindness, make you forget what they are." Or maybe, Fumiko said quietly from behind them, this is what following international law actually looks like. International law didn't stop them from burning Tokyo. No, but we're not in Tokyo anymore. The barracks assigned to them proved Mieko both right and wrong. Inside, the space was clean, genuinely clean, not just swept but scrubbed. Each woman had her own cot with a real mattress, not straw or canvas stretched over wooden slats. Actual pillows, blankets that smelled of soap instead of mildew and other women's fear. Small wooden lockers stood between the cots, empty now but offering the promise of personal space, private storage, the radical concept that prisoners might own things worth protecting. At the far end, a separate room held showers, real showers with individual stalls and curtains for privacy. Yuki sat on her assigned cot and bounced slightly, testing the mattress. Her eyes went wide. "Sister, it's soft." Around them, other women explored with the same mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. But Mieko remained standing, watching, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. That evening, dinner arrived on schedule. The mess hall at Camp Coastal Monterey held long tables with benches that didn't wobble. Windows looked out over pine forest and distant ocean. Electric lights hung from the ceiling, bright enough to actually see the food on their trays. And the food itself proved that the bacon breakfast hadn't been an isolated gesture. Vegetable soup with actual vegetables, chunks of carrot and potato and celery floating in rich broth. Fresh bread still warm from the oven with butter available in small dishes. Rice cooked properly, not the watery gruel they'd endured for months. And fish, real fish grilled with herbs that made the entire hall smell like a restaurant Mieko remembered from before the war. Coffee, milk for those who wanted it, even small cookies for dessert. Mieko ate slowly, analyzing each bite, looking for signs of degradation, of cheapness, of the inevitable moment when standards would slip. But the food remained good, remained generous, remained inexplicable. Corporal O'Brien appeared in the mess hall doorway. He didn't enter, just stood there for a moment, medical bag over his shoulder, surveying the room with those tired blue eyes. His gaze found Mieko's for just a second. He nodded once. Then he was gone. Yuki noticed her sister's attention drift toward the door. "That's the one who helped us at the other camp." "I know. He seems different from the others." Mieko had no response. She returned her attention to the soup, but the taste had changed. Now it carried questions she couldn't answer. The routine at Camp Coastal Monterey established itself with surprising speed. Wake at dawn to the sound of a bell, not shouted orders. Morning roll call in the courtyard, but brief and businesslike. Work assignments distributed fairly, kitchen duty, laundry, garden, maintenance, cleaning the shared spaces. But the work was lighter than before. Reasonable hours, breaks for water and rest. No one shouted. No one struck anyone for moving too slowly or making small mistakes. The change was so profound, it felt dangerous, like standing on ice that looks solid but might crack without warning. On the third morning, Mieko drew work assignment in the camp infirmary. Her nursing background had been noted in her file. The medical staff needed assistance with routine care. She reported to the infirmary with her stomach in knots. The building was small but well equipped. Examination table, cabinets stocked with supplies, bandages, and antiseptics and medications arranged in orderly rows, a desk with medical charts, windows that let in natural light. Nurse Bennett stood waiting. She smiled when Mieko entered. "Good morning. The translator told me you were a nurse before your capture. Field hospital experience." Mieko nodded, not trusting her limited English. "Excellent. We need help with daily health checks, making sure everyone's recovering from malnutrition, monitoring Ayame's pregnancy, treating minor injuries and infections. Can you do that?" Another nod. Bennett gestured to the supply cabinets. "Everything's organized by type. Use what you need. If we run low on anything, let me know, and I'll requisition more." Questions. Mieko's English failed her completely. She simply stood there trying to process the idea that she would have access to real medical supplies. Bennett seemed to understand without words. She pulled out a medical textbook from the desk drawer, English language but filled with diagrams that transcended vocabulary. "For you, to help with terminology. You can keep it." She set the book on the desk between them like an offering. Mieko stared at it. A gift. An actual gift. Medical knowledge freely given to an enemy prisoner. "Arigato," she whispered. "Thank you. You're welcome." The work proved both familiar and strange. Familiar because bodies were bodies regardless of nationality. Infections needed cleaning. Wounds needed dressing. Malnutrition required careful refeeding to avoid complications. Strange, because she was doing this work for her fellow prisoners under the supervision of enemy medical personnel who treated her like a colleague rather than a captive. Corporal O'Brien worked the infirmary as well, medical corpsman duties that overlapped with Nurse Bennett's Red Cross responsibilities. He came and went throughout the day, bringing supplies, checking on patients, administering medications prescribed by the camp doctor. He and Mieko developed a wordless system of cooperation. She would prepare bandages. He would bring patients who needed dressing changes. She would note symptoms. He would document them in medical charts with his careful handwriting. She would mix antiseptic solutions. He would sterilize instruments. No conversation, just the quiet efficiency of two medical professionals working toward the same goal despite the war that had put them on opposite sides. But Chio noticed. She came to the infirmary on the fourth day with a minor cut on her hand, barely worth treatment, and Mieko suspected she'd done it deliberately. "You work well with him," Chio said in Japanese while Mieko Xiiko cleaned the wound. Her eyes flicked toward Connor across the room. "The American. You've forgotten Hiroshi already." Mieko's hands didn't pause. "I haven't forgotten anything." "Then why do you smile when he brings you supplies? Why do you trust him?" "I don't smile." "You do. You don't even realize it." Mieko applied antiseptic with more force than necessary, making Chio wince. "What would you have me do? Refuse to treat our people because an American helps me do it? Let wounds fester to prove my hatred is pure? I'd have you remember who dropped the bombs, who killed your brother, who— I remember every day." Mieko's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut like steel. "But I also remember that Corporal O'Brien gave us hot water when he didn't have to, turned his back to give us privacy. That matters too. You're becoming their collaborator. I'm saving our people's lives. Is that different?" Chio pulled her hand away, the bandage only half applied. "Yes, because you're starting to see them as human, and that's exactly what they want." She left before Mieko could respond. Fifth day at Camp Coastal Monterey. Fumiko fell ill. It started with a cough, small at first, easy to dismiss as the result of cold coastal air and changing weather, but by evening the cough had deepened, wet and rattling. By the next morning Fumiko burned with fever. Mieko found her on her cot, barely conscious, skin hot to the touch, breathing labored. When she coughed, flecks of blood appeared on her lips. Pneumonia, advanced, complicated by months of malnutrition. Mieko ran to the infirmary. Nurse Bennett examined Fumiko immediately. Her expression grew grave as she listened to the older woman's lungs through her stethoscope. Pneumonia, severe. She needs proper antibiotics, the strong ones, penicillin. Bennett went to the radio and called the main base hospital, requested an emergency shipment of medications. 2 hours later, she returned to the infirmary, her face tight with controlled anger. "Request denied." Mieko's limited English caught the important word. She looked at Bennett with growing alarm. The nurse explained through the translator, her voice shaking slightly. "Sergeant Miller, he's in charge of medical supply allocation. He denied the requisition, said our basic antibiotics here are sufficient, that we can't justify using the strongest medications on prisoners when our own men might need them." "She will die," Mieko said in halting English. "I know." Bennett's hands clenched into fists. "I know." Mieko spent the next 2 days trying to keep Fumiko alive with insufficient tools. She administered the weaker antibiotics available in the infirmary. She kept the older woman hydrated with water and broth. She positioned her to help with breathing. She stayed up through the nights monitoring every breath, every spike of fever, every moment of delirium when Fumiko called for her dead husband in voices that broke Mieko's heart. Corporal O'Brien appeared frequently. He brought extra blankets. He helped reposition Fumiko when the coughing grew too severe. He looked at the medical charts with an expression that told Mieko he understood exactly what was happening. On the second night when Bennett had gone off duty and Mieko sat alone in the infirmary with her dying patient Connor, entered carrying something hidden in his medical bag. He looked around carefully, checking that they were alone, that no one else was near. Then he placed the bag on the desk between himself and Mieko. Inside, clearly visible, 2 vials of penicillin and a box of syringes. Mieko stared at them, then at Connor, then back at the medications that shouldn't exist in this room. He met her eyes, held her gaze, let her see what he was offering. Theft, court-martial if discovered, career-ending, possibly imprisonment, all of that in 2 vials of clear liquid that could save Fumiko's life. He spoke softly in English, too quiet for any guard outside to hear. Mieko caught only fragments, but Bennett had taught her enough medical terminology to understand the essential meaning. Every 4 hours, intramuscular injection, hide them. If anyone asks, say, Bennett got approval through different channels. Then he was gone, walking out of the infirmary into the night as if nothing had happened. Mieko stood frozen. The penicillin sat on the desk like a live grenade. She could report this, report Connor's theft to the camp authorities, follow the rules, stay safe, let Fumiko die according to proper protocols and regulations, or she could become complicit in theft of military medical supplies, break the rules that governed her captivity, trust an American soldier who had every reason to hate her and her people, all to save one older woman who taught Shakespeare to Japanese schoolgirls before the world went mad. Her hands trembled as she reached for the first vial. She administered the injection while Fumiko slept intramuscular, just as she'd done 1,000 times in the field hospitals. 4 hours later, the second dose. 4 hours after that. When Bennett arrived in the morning, Mieko told her the prepared lie that Bennett's requisition had been approved through alternate channels, that the penicillin had arrived during the night shift. Bennett looked at her for a long moment, then at the medical supply log where no shipment was recorded, then back at Mieko. She said nothing, just nodded once, and went to check Fumiko's vitals. Over the next 3 days, Fumiko's fever broke. The rattling in her lungs diminished. The blood disappeared from her cough. Color returned to her face. She would live, and Mieko had become something she'd never intended to be: a conspirator, someone who trusted the enemy enough to break rules together, someone who'd chosen mercy over obedience. The realization terrified her more than any threat of punishment, but then came the consequences she hadn't anticipated. December 1st, 1945, an announcement during morning formation. A Red Cross International Committee inspector would arrive on December 8th to evaluate camp conditions, to interview prisoners about their treatment, to ensure compliance with all international protocols. Camp Commander Richardson delivered the news himself, his expression carefully neutral. Around Mieko, the women exchanged glances. Was this good news or dangerous news, an opportunity or a trap? That afternoon, Sergeant Miller appeared in the compound for the first time since they'd arrived at Camp Coastal Monterey. He'd been stationed elsewhere. They'd heard reassigned after some dispute with Camp Command. But now he was back. Temporary duty until after the Red Cross inspection. His presence changed everything. The air itself seemed to contract. Guards who'd been relatively relaxed suddenly stood straighter, moved with more aggressive purpose, watched the prisoners with eyes that assessed rather than merely observed. Miller walked through the women's work areas with his clipboard noting everything: the garden plots, the kitchen, the barracks. He stopped at the infirmary. Mieko was treating a minor cut on Chiyo's hand when Miller entered. Connor was across the room organizing supplies. Bennett was in the back reviewing patient charts. Miller looked at the well-stocked cabinets, at the clean examination table, at the medical equipment arranged with professional care. "Corporal O'Brien," Connor straightened. "Yes, Sergeant. Medical supply inventory. I need a complete accounting before the inspection. Every bandage, every medication, every piece of equipment. Cross-reference it with requisition records." "Yes, Sergeant. I'll have it ready tomorrow." Miller's gaze moved to Mieko, swept over her like she was an obstacle in his path. "She works here now." Yes, Sergeant. Medical assistant. Her nursing experience has been invaluable for... I don't care about her experience. I care about security. His voice was flat, emotionless. New protocol effective immediately. All work in this infirmary will be directly supervised by American personnel at all times. No prisoner gets unsupervised access to medical supplies. Connor's jaw tightened. Sergeant, she's been working here for 2 weeks without incident. Her help has allowed us to... Are you questioning my orders, Corporal? No, Sergeant. Good. Miller turned to leave, stopped in the doorway. Didn't look back. The inspector arrives at 0900 hours on the 8th. This infirmary will be spotless. The patient records will be complete and accurate. The supply inventory will match requisition logs perfectly. Is that understood? Yes, Sergeant. He left. In the silence that followed, Connor's hands gripped the edge of the desk, hard enough to make his knuckles white. Bennett emerged from the back room. He's going to find the discrepancy, the penicillin that's not in the logs. I know. If he reports it, he'll want to know who authorized it. And when he can't find authorization, Connor looked at Mieko. We're all implicated. So what do we do? Bennett asked. Connor was quiet for a long moment. Then, we create the authorization, backdate a requisition form, make it look like it went through proper channels but got filed wrong. That's forgery. That's survival. Bennett looked at both of them, the American corpsman and the Japanese prisoner, who'd somehow become co-conspirators in mercy. Do it, she said finally. I'll sign whatever needs signing. If this goes wrong, it goes wrong on my authority. That night, Mieko couldn't sleep. Yuki whispered in the darkness, what happens if they discover what you did, what Corporal O'Brien did? I don't know. Was it worth it, saving Fumiko? Mieko thought of the older woman now sleeping peacefully, 3 cots away, breathing clear, fever gone, alive. Yes, she said, even if they punish us, even if... A sound outside made her stop. Footsteps on gravel, coming toward the barracks. The door opened. Connor stood there silhouetted against the guard tower lights. He shouldn't be here. Male guards didn't enter the women's barracks except during inspections. Tanaka, he said quietly, I need to speak with you. Outside. Mieko followed him into the cold December night, heart hammering. He led her away from the barracks toward the infirmary. Somewhere they could talk without being overheard. When they were alone, he turned to face her. Miller knows, Connor said. He doesn't have proof yet, but he knows something's wrong. The inventory, he's going to find the missing penicillin. What do we do? Bennett created the paperwork. It's good she's done this before, apparently. Help prisoners in other camps. But if the inspector asks detailed questions, if they verify with the base hospital, then we are discovered. Yes, Mieko was quiet. Then, why did you do it? Risk so much for enemy prisoner. Connor looked away toward the ocean, invisible in the darkness, but present in the sound of waves against rocks. My brother Thomas, he said finally. He died at Iwo Jima, 22 years old. Before he shipped out, he told me that the worst thing about war wasn't dying. It was losing the part of yourself that cared whether the person bleeding next to you was on your side or theirs. He turned back to her. When I saw Fumiko dying, and I had the medicine that could save her, and I knew Miller would say no just because she's Japanese, I thought about Thomas, about what he'd want me to do, and I realized the part of me that can still see a sick woman instead of an enemy. That's the part Thomas died protecting. Mieko felt something crack open in her chest, some long frozen place. Your brother, she said softly. He sounds like my brother. Hiroshi. He believed dying for country was highest honor. Did you believe that? I did, until I held enough dying boys and realized they all cry for their mothers the same way. Japanese, American, doesn't matter. They stood in the cold night, 2 people who'd lost too much, who'd seen too much. The inspector comes in 7 days, Connor said. Whatever happens, I want you to know I don't regret it, saving her, even if it cost me everything. Neither do I, Mieko said, and she meant it. December 7, 1945, 3:17 a.m. The screaming woke Mieko, not the controlled fear of women who'd learned to swallow their terror. This was primal animal, the sound of someone whose body had overridden all restraint. She was on her feet before consciousness fully returned. Around her, other women bolted upright in their cots. The screaming came from Ayame's bunk near the back of the barracks. Mieko ran bare feet slapping against cold wood. She reached Ayame just as Fumiko arrived from the other direction, both of them moving with the practiced speed of women who'd seen too many emergencies. Ayame lay curled on her side, both hands clutching her swollen belly. Her face was contorted. Her prison uniform was soaked, not with sweat, with fluid, clear and streaked with red. Her water had broken, but the blood meant something was very wrong. "The baby," Ayame gasped between contractions. "Something's wrong. The baby's not moving right." Mieko pressed her hands to Ayame's abdomen, felt the contraction rippling through distended muscle, felt the hardness of the baby's position, too high, too transverse, not engaged in the birth canal the way it should be at 8 months. Breach, or worse. "Fumiko, get Nurse Bennett. Now, run." The older woman was already moving out the barracks door into the December night, her calls for help echoing across the compound. Bennett arrived within minutes, still pulling on her coat. Connor was right behind her medical bag, already open. They assessed the situation with the quick efficiency of people who'd seen complications before. "We need to move her to the infirmary. Now, Connor." "I've got her." He lifted Ayame like she weighed nothing. The pregnant woman screamed again as movement triggered another contraction. He moved fast across the compound toward the medical building, Bennett and Mieko running beside him. The infirmary lights blazed on. Bennett swept everything off the examination table in one motion. Connor laid Ayame down as gently as combat conditions allowed. Bennett examined her quickly. Her face went pale. "The baby's breech, footling breech, and the cord," she felt carefully. "The cord is prolapsed. I can feel it." She looked up, met Connor's eyes. "If we don't get this baby out in the next 20 minutes, it dies. Maybe the mother too." "We need the base hospital," Connor said. "Full surgical team, emergency C-section. That's the only way to—" "I'll call it in." Connor was already moving toward the radio, but Sergeant Miller appeared in the doorway. He'd been woken by the commotion. He stood there in his undershirt, burn-scarred arm, exposed, eyes hard. "What's happening?" "Emergency obstetric complication," Bennett said, her voice tight. "I need immediate transport to base hospital for surgical delivery." The word dropped like a stone into water. "Denied." Bennett spun to face him. "Sergeant, this woman and her baby will die without proper surgical intervention." "Then they die." The infirmary went silent except for Ayame's labored breathing. "No Japanese prisoner gets transported to base hospital." Miller continued, his voice flat. "No exceptions, especially not the night before inspection. This is a medical emergency. This is war, Nurse Bennett. People die in war. That's how it works." Connor stepped forward, his voice carefully controlled, but Mieko could see rage vibrating through him. "Sergeant Miller, sir, with respect. The war is over. These are prisoners under our protection. We have obligations under Geneva Convention, Article 15. Don't lecture me about obligations, Corporal." Miller's voice was ice. "My obligation is to American servicemen, not to the people whose country killed my wife." He looked at Ayame, writhing on the table, at the blood pooling beneath her. "You want to save this prisoner. Do it here, with what you have. Or don't. I don't care which." He turned to leave. Bennett's voice stopped him. "If she dies because you denied transport, I will document every detail in my Red Cross report. The inspector arrives tomorrow. He will read exactly what happened here and why." Miller looked back at her. His face was stone. "You do what you think is right, nurse. So will I." He left. Bennett stood frozen for 3 seconds. Then she moved. "We do the delivery here. Emergency surgical intervention. We have local anesthetic. We have surgical tools. We don't have everything we need, but we have enough to try." She looked at Connor. I need you to assist. You've done field surgery. Yes, in the Pacific. Nothing like this. It'll have to do. Then she looked at Mieko. Can you do this? Have you assisted with surgical deliveries before? Mieko understood enough. She nodded. Yes, Okinawa Field Hospital, many times. Under what conditions? Bombs, no power, almost no supplies. Bennett's expression shifted recognition of shared experience across battle lines. Then you know what we're facing. Yes. Can you handle it? I must. Bennett began pulling supplies from cabinets, surgical drapes, scalpels, sutures, clamps. Connor scrubbed his hands at the sink until they were raw. Mieko did the same. Bennett prepared the anesthetic, a series of local injections that would numb the surgical field but leave Ayame conscious. She would feel everything except the actual cutting. Ayame looked up at the three faces above her, enemy nurse, enemy soldier, fellow prisoner, her life and her baby's life in their hands. Please, she whispered in Japanese, save my baby. Even if you can't save me, promise me, save my baby. Mieko took her hand. We save both. I promise. She had no right to make that promise, but she made it anyway. Bennett positioned herself at the surgical field. Connor stood ready to assist. Mieko monitored Ayame's vitals and stood ready to receive the infant. Ready? Bennett asked. Both assistants nodded. Then let's bring this baby into the world. The incision was clean. Bennett had steady hands despite the circumstances. She cut through skin and fat and muscle with precision born of training and necessity. Blood welled up. Connor suctioned. Mieko provided instruments before Bennett had to ask for them, the wordless communication of medical professionals who'd done this dance before in worse conditions. The uterus appeared distended and purple, contracting irregularly. Bennett made the second incision carefully through the uterine wall into the amniotic sac that held the baby. More blood. Too much blood. She's hemorrhaging, Bennett said, her voice tight but controlled. Connor, we need to get this baby out now. His hands joined Bennett's in the surgical field. Together they reached into Ayame's body and grasped the tiny feet that had presented first instead of the head. Gently but firmly they pulled. The baby emerged in stages, feet, legs, torso. The cord was wrapped around the neck, blue and pulseless. Connor unwrapped it with fingers that moved with surprising gentleness for hands that large. Arms, shoulders, and finally the head. A baby girl, tiny, premature, covered in blood and vernix, not breathing, not making any sound at all. Bennett clamped and cut the cord past the infant to Mieko. The baby was limp in her hands, skin blue-gray, no respiratory effort, no heartbeat that she could detect. Mieko cleared the infant's mouth and nose, positioned the tiny head to open the airway, began rescue breathing small puffs of air into lungs the size of walnuts. Come on, she whispered in Japanese. Breathe. You must breathe. Your mother is waiting. Your whole life is waiting. Nothing. She placed 2 fingers on the baby's chest, found the position over the heart, began compressions 30 per minute, tiny careful compressions that could save or could break ribs if done wrong. Behind her, Bennett was trying to control Ayame's hemorrhage. Connor had his hands inside Ayame's abdomen, applying pressure to bleeding vessels. How's the baby? Bennett called out. Mieko didn't answer. She was counting compressions, breathing for the infant, watching for any sign of independent life. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Connor glanced over his shoulder, saw what Mieko was doing, saw the blue baby that wasn't responding. He made a decision. Bennett, I need to leave you for 30 seconds. What? No, I need you here. The baby needs blood, universal donor. He was already pulling his hands free from the surgical field, grabbing a tourniquet and needle from the supply cabinet. I'm O negative. He tied off his own arm, found his vein, drew blood directly into a syringe, brought it to Mieko. Umbilical vein. Push it slow. She understood, took the syringe with bloody hands, found the stump of umbilical cord still attached to the baby, located the vein, pushed the needle in, American soldier's blood flowing into Japanese baby. She injected slowly, watched the infant's color, kept doing compressions with her other hand, and then the baby gasped, a small sound barely audible, but a breath, an independent breath, another gasp. The baby's chest rose on its own. Color began to return blue-gray, shifting toward pink. The tiny girl opened her mouth and cried. It was the most beautiful sound Mieko had ever heard. Behind them, Bennett had stopped the Hamar aging. Ayame was stable, pale from blood loss, but alive, breathing. Her eyes fluttered open. My baby. Mieko wrapped the infant in a clean towel, brought her to her mother, placed the tiny girl on Ayame's chest. Your daughter. She lives. You both live. Ayame began to cry, her hands coming up to touch her baby with trembling fingers. The infant nuzzled against her mother's skin, still crying, but with decreasing urgency as she found warmth and familiar heartbeat. Bennett finished the surgical closure layer by layer, muscle, fat, skin. Connor leaned against the wall, his arm still bleeding from where he'd drawn blood. Mieko grabbed gauze, wrapped it quickly, applied pressure. He didn't seem to notice. He just stared at the baby girl crying on her mother's chest. The door opened. Sergeant Miller stood there. He'd heard the infant's cry. He looked at the scene before him, the successful surgery, the living mother and child, the blood everywhere. His face was unreadable. You disobeyed my orders. Bennett pulled down her surgical mask. Blood spattered her uniform. We saved 2 lives, Sergeant, following Geneva Convention medical care requirements, which supersede your authority. That's not for you to decide. Actually, under Red Cross Charter, it is exactly for me to decide. Miller's jaw clenched. The burn scars on his arm seemed to pulse with his rage. But then something shifted in his eyes, something that looked almost like pain. He looked at Connor. And you drew your own blood for a prisoner. Yes, Sergeant. You understand that's not standard procedure. I understand that the alternative was watching an infant die when I had the ability to prevent it, sir. Miller stared at him for a long moment. Some calculation or memory or internal battle played out in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter. Okinawa, June 1945. My unit found a group of Japanese prisoners, civilians mostly wounded, in an artillery strike. There was a woman, pregnant. He paused. I tried to save her, used my own med kit, but we didn't have enough supplies, no blood. She died. The baby died, right in front of me. He looked at the baby on Ayame's chest. I hated it. Hated feeling helpless. And I hated that I cared that I tried to save the enemy when my wife died at Pearl Harbor because of them. His voice cracked slightly. So when you saved this prisoner, when you saved her baby, I hated you for it, but I also understood. Bennett spoke carefully. Why are you telling us this, Sergeant? Because the inspector arrives at 0900 tomorrow, and he's going to ask questions about the supplies, about the procedures, about everything. He looked at each of them in turn. When he does, I'm going to tell him that I authorized the emergency delivery, that I made the call to do it here instead of risking transport, that Corporal O'Brien acted on my orders when he provided blood for the infant. You'd lie for us, Connor asked. I'd take responsibility for what happened in my camp under my watch. There's a difference. Miller turned to leave, stopped at the door, didn't look back. That baby. What's her name? Ayame looked up from her daughter, spoke in halting English that Fumiko had been teaching her. Keiko. It means blessing. Miller's shoulders shifted, some small release of tension that might have been acknowledgement or might have been nothing at all. Blessing, he repeated quietly. Then he was gone. December 8th, 1945, 9:00 a.m. Dr. Heinrich Müller of the Swiss Red Cross arrived at Camp Coastal Monterey precisely on time. 60 years old, steel gray hair, wire-rimmed spectacles. He carried a leather portfolio and a reputation for absolute integrity that made commanders nervous across 3 continents. Camp Commander Richardson met him at the gate with full military courtesy. The tour began immediately. Mueller inspected everything: barracks, kitchen, work areas, garden plots. He asked questions in precise English with a German accent. He took notes in neat handwriting. At 11 Surrey, he reached the infirmary. Bennett showed him the facilities, the supplies, the medical records. He examined everything with meticulous attention. Then Fumiko appeared, the English teacher whom Mieko had saved with stolen penicillin. She'd been selected as spokesperson because of her language skills. Mueller interviewed her with Sergeant Miller, standing silently in the corner. Mrs. Ishida, how would you describe your medical care in this facility? Fumiko looked at Miller, then at Bennett, then back at Mueller. Her voice was steady. The care has been adequate to good. We receive regular health checks. Wounds and illnesses are treated promptly. I see. The medical logs show you developed pneumonia 2 weeks ago and received penicillin that saved your life. Can you tell me about that? Silence fell across the infirmary. Fumiko chose her words with a Shakespeare teacher's precision. I don't know the administrative details of how medicine is allocated. I know only that when I needed it, it arrived. And I am alive because of it. Technically true, completely misleading, perfect testimony. Mueller made a note. And the quality of your rations, much improved in recent weeks. We receive adequate calories, fresh vegetables, protein regularly. Have you been mistreated in any way? Fumiko paused. The conditions here are significantly better than many expected. We are treated according to international standards. Some guards show more compassion than others, but we have not been subjected to abuse. Then Mueller asked the question that made everyone tense. I understand there was a medical emergency last night, a surgical delivery. Can you tell me about that? Miller shifted his weight. Bennett's hands clenched at her sides. Fumiko looked at the Swiss doctor with eyes that had seen her sister jump from a cliff rather than surrender. Yes, Ayame Nakamura gave birth to a daughter, Keiko. There were complications. The medical staff here performed emergency surgery and saved both lives. It was remarkable work under difficult circumstances. I would like to see the mother and infant. They moved to the recovery area where Ayame rested with her baby. Mueller examined them both with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen many emergency medical situations. He reviewed Bennett's surgical notes. Nurse Bennett, this says you performed a cesarean section with only local anesthetic and limited surgical supplies. Yes, doctor. And you had assistance from Corporal O'Brien and a Japanese prisoner with nursing experience. Yes, doctor. Tanaka, former field nurse. Her experience was invaluable. Mueller looked at Connor, who stood at attention near the door. You drew your own blood during an emergency surgical procedure and administered it to a prisoner's infant. Yes, sir. That's quite irregular. Yes, sir, but effective. The faintest hint of a smile crossed Mueller's face. Indeed. He made several more notes, then closed his portfolio. I've seen enough here. Thank you all for your cooperation. He prepared to leave, then stopped, turned back to face Sergeant Miller directly. Sergeant, I understand you were the senior NCO on duty when this emergency occurred. Yes, sir. And I understand there was discussion about transport to base hospital. Miller's jaw tightened. There were security considerations, sir, and resource allocation questions. My decision was to handle the emergency with available resources at this facility. Which resources proved adequate due to the exceptional skill of your medical personnel? Had they been less skilled, the outcome might have been different. Yes, sir. In my report, I will note that this facility's medical staff performed admirably under difficult circumstances. I will also note that future emergencies should be handled with all available resources, including transport to advanced medical facilities when indicated, regardless of the nationality of the patient. It wasn't quite a reprimand, but close enough that everyone understood what Mueller was saying. Understood, sir. Mueller nodded once, then left to continue his inspection. January 10th, 1946, morning of departure. The women gathered in the compound with their small bags of belongings. Everything they owned in the world fit into canvas sacks that could be carried on one shoulder. They wore donated civilian clothes dresses and coats provided by Red Cross shoes that fit scarves against winter cold. Ayame held baby Keiko against her chest wrapped in blankets. The infant was 2 months old now, still small, but thriving. Trucks waited at the gate to take them to San Francisco port, to ships that would carry them across the Pacific to whatever remained of their homeland. The camp staff lined up to see them off. Commander Richardson, Nurse Bennett, the guards who'd maintained order without cruelty, and Connor standing slightly apart, medical bag over his shoulder, even though there was no medical emergency, just habit perhaps, or the need to hold something familiar. Mieko walked to him. They'd said their real goodbyes in private, but this public farewell still mattered. Corporal O'Brien, Miss Tanaka, I will write to you. If letters from Japan are allowed, I'd like that. And if I am ever able to visit America, I will come to Nebraska, to your farm. I'd like that too. They both knew it would probably never happen. The distance was too great, the political situation too complicated, the wounds too fresh, but saying it made it possible, gave it shape in the world. She bowed formally. He saluted. Then, in a gesture that surprised them both, they shook hands, her small hand in his large one. Enemy and protector, prisoner and guard. Two people who'd chosen to see each other as human. Connor approached one last time before the trucks departed. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper, still warm. Mieko opened it. Inside 2 strips of bacon, cooked that morning, wrapped carefully in wax paper. A note in Japanese. Bennett had helped translate it. So you remember not just the fear, but the breakfast that changed everything. The moment you chose to trust. C.O.B. Mieko looked at the bacon. The same bacon from that first morning. The food that had cracked open her certainty about enemies. She took a bite. Still warm. Still delicious. Still impossible. And this time she cried from gratitude, not confusion, because she understood now. This wasn't about bacon. This was about the courage to see humanity where propaganda demanded monsters. She wrapped the remaining piece carefully. She would save it, carry it across the ocean, a talisman against hate. The trucks started their engines. Time to go. Mieko climbed aboard with Yuki beside her. The canvas cover closed. The convoy began to move. She looked back one last time at Camp Coastal Monterey, at the barracks where she'd learned that not all prisons were the same, at the infirmary where she'd practiced medicine again, at the mess hall where she'd tasted bacon and understood that food could be a bridge, and at Connor standing by the gate watching them leave, getting smaller as distance increased, finally disappearing around a curve in the road. Yuki leaned against her shoulder. Will we ever see them again, sister? I don't know, but I want to. Tokyo, 1986. Dr. Mieko Tanaka, now 67, sat at her desk, surrounded by medical texts and patient files. She'd become an obstetrician after returning to Japan, trained in the ruins, built a practice, delivered over 2,000 babies in her career. Each one reminded her of Keiko, of the night when mercy had saved lives. Her granddaughter Hana looked up from homework. Grandmother, this letter came for you, from America. Mieko's hand shook as she took the envelope. Law Office, Alliance, Nebraska. Connor O'Brien had died peacefully, surrounded by family at 65. He'd never married, lived his entire life on the family farm, established a scholarship fund for Japanese American students after the war, worked as a community medic, lived quietly and well, and he'd left her something in his will, the farm, 160 acres, with the stipulation that she could sell it, visit it, or simply know it was there, her choice. A personal letter was enclosed, written in his final days. Dear Mieko, I wrote you 47 letters between 1946 and 1986. You wrote me 52. We never met again after you boarded that truck in California, but you were with me every day of my life. The war ended, but what we shared in that camp, that was the rarest thing in the world. The farm is yours now. Every morning I worked that land, I thought of you. Every seed planted was a prayer for healing between our peoples. Every harvest was hope that mercy outlives hatred. Don't mourn me long. I lived fully. I died knowing I made the right choice in that camp. With deepest respect and yes, love, the quiet kind that crosses oceans, Connor O'Brien. Miyako read the letter 3 times, then she wept. She stood and walked to her small household shrine, placed Connor's photograph there beside the memorial tablets for her parents and brother, lit incense. Thank you, Connor O'Brien, she whispered in English, for teaching me that humanity survives even when nations try to destroy it. On her desk, preserved under glass for 40 years, sat a small piece of wax paper stained with grease, faded but intact, the wrapper from Connor's final gift. Not the bacon itself she'd eaten that long ago, but the wrapper remained, proof that in humanity's darkest hour, one man from Nebraska had chosen mercy over vengeance, had fed his enemies the breakfast his brother died protecting, had given blood to save an enemy infant, had offered friendship across an ocean of grief, and she had chosen to accept it. That choice had defined her life, shaped her into a doctor who delivered 2,000 babies, taught her that healing was always possible, even after the deepest wounds. Outside Tokyo glittered rebuilt thriving, a miracle born from ashes, just like her, just like the friendship that had crossed oceans and outlasted war. She smiled, because some gifts last forever, even when they're wrapped in bacon grease and impossible hope.